Chapter 11. The Frozen Witness. Chief Maria Rodriguez arrived at Connor's office at 1:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour after his call from the riverbank. She came alone, which Connor appreciated. Some conversations didn't need witnesses, didn't need the complications of official procedure and documented evidence. At least, not yet. Connor had changed into dry clothes he kept in the office closet. Jeans, a flannel shirt, practical boots. He'd also made coffee, strong enough to strip paint, and arranged 2 chairs facing each other across his desk. Professional distance, medical consultation. Except what he was about to say would shatter every boundary between doctor and patient, between physician and law enforcement, between the living and the dead. Maria looked tired. She'd been Millbrook's police chief for 15 years, had worked her way up through the ranks over 20 years in law enforcement, and Connor knew her well enough to read the particular exhaustion in her posture. This wasn't just late-night weariness. This was the bone-deep fatigue of someone who'd been dealing with too many deaths, too many questions, too many cases that didn't quite add up. Connor, she took the offered coffee cup and sat down heavily. When you called and said you needed to report 9 murders, I thought maybe you'd finally cracked, and the stress finally got to you. Connor managed a thin smile. I wish that were true. It would be simpler. So what are we talking about here? You said Ian Martin, the real estate developer. What the hell does he have to do with... She stopped, her eyes narrowing. Jennifer Wu. You said Jennifer was murdered. She was run off the Black River Bridge tonight. Made to look like an accident, but it was deliberate. Ian Martin killed her because she was investigating him. Connor kept his voice level, clinical. And before Jennifer, he killed 6 others, all elderly property owners who refused to sell to him, all staged to look like natural deaths or accidents. Maria set down her coffee cup very carefully. Connor, those are serious accusations. And you're telling me this now? After someone else died? Why the hell didn't you come to me earlier? Because I'm an idiot who thought he could handle it himself. Connor's voice was flat, honest. Because I was more interested in orchestrating a psychological confrontation than in actually stopping a killer. Because I've spent 4 centuries playing games with mortality, and I forgot that real people were dying while I planned my revenge. Revenge for what? Connor stood and walked to the window, looking out at Millbrook's dark streets. The 6 people Ian killed weren't just my patients. They were people I could have saved, should have saved, and I was so busy being clever, so focused on making Ian confess through elaborate psychological manipulation, that Jennifer died while I was playing games. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Connor could hear her processing, could almost feel her law enforcement instincts warring with personal trust. She'd known Connor for 15 years, had brought her own mother to him when the cancer diagnosis came, had seen him save lives with skill that seemed almost miraculous. But this was different. This was claiming to have evidence of serial murder in her town, evidence he'd apparently been sitting on while people died. Walk me through it, she said finally. From the beginning? And Connor, I need evidence, not theories. I need proof that will hold up in court, not conjecture. Connor returned to his chair and pulled out the files Jennifer had compiled. The patient records, the death certificates, the property transaction histories, the insurance policies, the financial data, the systematic pattern of murder for profit that Jennifer had traced with meticulous precision. 6 murders, Connor began. Eleanor Henderson, Margaret Chen, David Ortiz, Harold Pemberton, Rebecca Walsh, Thomas Grayson, all elderly property owners, all targeted by Ian Martin, with purchase offers they refused, all dead within weeks or months of their refusals. Drowning, robbery, falls, strangulation, all causes that seemed natural enough to avoid suspicion. Maria took the files, began reading with the focused intensity of a career investigator. Connor watched her face as the pattern emerged, watched understanding dawn, and then harden into something colder. Jesus Christ, she whispered. I investigated all of these. We found no signs, no indication. She looked up sharply. You're telling me Ian did all of this? Almost certainly, just like he ran Jennifer off the bridge tonight. He's escalated from elderly victims to active threats. Jennifer was investigating him, getting too close, so he eliminated her. And you. Maria's eyes were hard now, cop eyes, measuring Connor for truth and lies. You knew about this. You had evidence. Why the hell didn't you bring this to me weeks ago? Connor had prepared for this question, had rehearsed various answers during the drive from the river, but sitting across from Maria, seeing the betrayal and anger in her face, he couldn't bring himself to offer comfortable lies. Because I wanted to confront him myself first, Connor said quietly. I wanted to make him suffer psychologically before turning him over to legal justice. I wanted him to know what he'd done, to feel the weight of it, to confess not because of evidence, but because he couldn't bear the knowledge anymore. He met Maria's gaze directly. I was wrong. It was arrogant and stupid, and it got Jennifer killed. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for help stopping him before he kills anyone else. Maria was silent for a long moment, her hands gripping the files so hard her knuckles went white. Connor had seen that look before, the moment when someone had to choose between personal feelings and professional duty, between what they wanted to do and what they needed to do. The evidence, she said finally, it's compelling but circumstantial. Good enough for an investigation, not good enough for an arrest. We need more. I can give you more. Connor leaned forward. All 7 of the people Ian killed. They're still alive. Maria's expression went very still. Excuse me? They survived, all of them. They're currently staying at a location outside of town, recovering from their ordeals. Connor kept his voice calm, professional, as if he were discussing a routine medical case rather than an impossibility. And they're willing to testify about what Ian did to them. Connor. Maria's voice was dangerously quiet. I was at Eleanor Henderson's funeral. I signed off on the police report for her death investigation. I watched them lower her coffin into the ground. Are you telling me? I'm telling you that Eleanor is alive and well and currently making breakfast at a farmhouse about 15 miles from here, along with 5 other people who are officially declared dead and buried. And Jennifer is on her way to them as well, all victims of Ian Martin, all willing to tell you exactly what he did to them. Maria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't funny, Connor. If this is some kind of... It's not a joke. Connor pulled out his phone and held it up. I can call Eleanor right now. You can talk to her yourself. Or better yet, I can take you to meet all of them. Tonight. Right now. That's impossible. People don't just come back from the dead. I saw the bodies. I attended the funerals. Eleanor's death certificate was signed by the county coroner. She stopped, staring at Connor. You signed most of those certificates. You pronounced them dead. I did, because they were dead. And then I brought them back. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and undeniable. Connor watched Maria's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally a kind of desperate hope that was almost painful to witness. How? She whispered. That's complicated and not immediately relevant. What matters is that I now have 7 living witnesses to Ian Martin's murders. 7 people who can testify in court about what he did to them. 7 impossible resurrections that will destroy his defense and guarantee conviction. Maria sat down slowly, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up her coffee cup. You're telling me you can resurrect the dead? In a manner of speaking, yes, Connor said flatly. Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing. Connor could see her law enforcement training warring with the impossible evidence before her, could watch her trying to find rational explanations and coming up short. The survivors, she said finally. You said they've been taunting Ian, showing up places to mess with him psychologically. Yes, Eleanor's idea, actually. They've been appearing at his open houses, at the bank where he does business, at the grocery store, letting him see them alive and well, watching him panic and spiral. Connor's voice was grim. It was meant to drive him toward a confession, to make him so desperate and paranoid that he'd slip up. Instead, it pushed him to kill Jennifer, to stop the investigation. And you didn't think to stop them? To warn them this might escalate? I encouraged them. The admission tasted like ash. I thought psychological pressure would force Ian into making a mistake. I thought I could control the situation, manipulate the outcome. I was wrong on every count. Maria picked up one of the files, flipped through it with mechanical precision. Eleanor Henderson. Died. Cause of death. Accidental drowning in her bathtub. How did Ian actually kill her? Connor had reviewed all the cases, had studied Jennifer's meticulous research, hit her over the head, then held her underwater to make it appear natural. Eleanor was found in her home by me, already dead. I pronounced her, signed the death certificate, and the family arranged a funeral. Ian purchased her property from her estate 2 weeks later at 60% of market value. And then you brought her back? Yes, 12 hours later, in the morgue. Performed the resurrection by giving her the antidote to the tetrodotoxin, pufferfish poison that makes you appear dead, and gave her medical care while she recovered. She's been living at my farmhouse ever since, along with the others, as I brought them back one by one. This is insane. Maria rubbed her temples. Even if I believe you, and I'm not saying I do, how exactly do you plan to present 6, no 7, legally dead people as witnesses? Their testimony won't be admissible. Hell, they don't legally exist anymore. Death certificates were filed, estates were settled, social security numbers were retired. You can't just resurrect people and expect them to testify in court. Well, only 5 are technically dead, as Jennifer has not been officially pronounced dead, and Margaret miraculously survived poisoning, remember? So we'll figure out the legal complications later. What matters now is stopping Ian before he kills again. Connor leaned forward, his voice urgent. He's already escalated from killing for profit to eliminating witnesses. Jennifer found his pattern, traced his financial motive, identified his next likely victims. That's why he killed her. And he won't stop there. Maria was quiet, her fingers drumming on the desk as she processed everything. The survivors, you said they've been showing up at his properties, at the bank, at the grocery store, taunting him. Yes, Eleanor's idea. It was originally supposed to make him back off, but it quickly backfired. She wanted to watch him panic, to see his face when he realized his victims weren't staying dead. The others joined in, appearing at open houses he was hosting, standing in line behind him at the coffee shop, walking past him on the street. Psychological warfare. And you approved this? I encouraged it. Connor's voice was bitter. I thought it was brilliant. Poetic justice. The murdered confronting their killer, driving him slowly insane with the impossibility of their existence. I thought it would force him into a confession, or at least a mistake we could exploit. Instead, it pushed him to kill Jennifer, to stop the investigation. Maria's eyes were hard. Connor, these people, your resurrection victims, they're in danger. If Ian knows they're alive, if he's seen them, he might come after them, might try to finish what he started. They're safe. They're staying at a secure location, well outside town. Ian doesn't know where they are. But he knows they exist, and he's already proven he's willing to kill to protect himself. Maria stood, began pacing. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I need to interview these people, get their statements, understand exactly what happened to each of them. I need evidence that will hold up, even if the witnesses themselves are legally complicated. And I need to do this before Ian realizes we're closing in. Connor nodded. I can arrange that. But Connor, I need you to understand something. Maria stopped pacing, fixed him with a steady gaze. When this is over, when Ian Martin is in custody, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about what you did and what the hell we're supposed to do about it. You can't just fake resurrect people and expect the world to accommodate that. There are implications. Legal, medical, ethical, theological. This is going to get complicated. I know. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. Maria's voice softened slightly. Connor, I've known you for 15 years. You've been a good doctor, a good person. You've saved lives, helped people, served this community. But this changes everything, and I don't know how to process it yet. Connor met her gaze steadily. Neither do I, Maria. I've crossed the line as a medical professional, and I still don't have good answers. All I know is that Ian Martin is a serial killer who's murdered at least 7 people that we know of, although they were faked. He still attempted the murders, and if we don't stop him, he'll do it again. For real this time. Everything else, the questions about what happens next, we can deal with after he's in custody. Maria nodded slowly. Agreed. First priority is stopping a killer. Second priority is figuring out what to do with a doctor playing God. She almost smiled. Never thought I'd have to add that to my case priorities. Welcome to my world. Maria gathered the files Connor had given her, tucking them into her briefcase. I'll need to see these people tomorrow. Can you arrange that? I'll call ahead, make sure they're ready to talk. Fair warning, some of them are still processing their own deaths and resurrections. It's traumatic. Coming back, they may not be the most coherent witnesses. I've interviewed trauma victims before. I know how to handle it. Maria headed towards the door, then paused. Connor? Jennifer? Are you going to? She's safe. She should already be at the farmhouse. Connor's voice was flat. And Ian? When we catch him? And we will catch him. If he dies, are you going to resurrect him too? Give him a second chance? Connor's smile was cold. No, some people don't deserve resurrection. Some people deserve exactly what death gives them. An ending. Maria nodded, accepting this. Good, because if you brought that bastard back, I'd have to arrest you for obstruction of justice. She opened the door, then looked back. Get some rest, Connor. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow. After she left, Connor sat alone in his office, surrounded by files and coffee cups and the weight of his own choices. Jennifer was safe. 7 people had been murdered and resurrected. A serial killer was still free, probably planning his next move. And Connor McMasters, who'd spent 4 centuries avoiding exactly this kind of exposure, had just revealed his greatest secret to the local police chief. No going back now, only forward, toward whatever consequences awaited. A few hours ago, Connor followed them to the morgue, waited until it was empty, and Jennifer's body was alone in refrigerated storage. He'd gone through the motions at the hospital, formal identification, paperwork, quiet conversations with staff who offered sympathy he couldn't process. Now, in the silent morgue at 2 a.m, Connor entered using his access code and moved through the facility with automatic precision. He knew every camera, every blind spot, every route that avoided digital surveillance. He'd been doing this for decades, but his hands shook as he opened the drawer. Jennifer lay on the metal slab, covered by a sheet, her body cold from 2 hours of refrigeration. Connor pulled the sheet back slowly, as if sudden movement might make this more real, more final. She looked peaceful, almost sleeping, if you ignored the impact bruising on her face and the unnatural stillness of death. Her ponytail was still partially intact. Her work clothes were soaked and cold. Someone had closed her eyes and folded her hands across her chest in a gesture of respect that made Connor's throat tighten. He placed his hands on her forehead, feeling the cold of her skin, the absence of pulse and breath and life. The familiar routine should have been automatic: incantation in Old Irish, surge of power, green light, resurrection. But for the first time in hundreds of resurrections, Connor hesitated. What if it didn't work? The question paralyzed him. What if she was too damaged, been dead too long, the drowning and impact too severe? What if Connor brought her back broken, traumatized, beyond repair, like Harold, whose mind had shattered from the violence of stabbing? What if the water had destroyed too much of her brain tissue, leaving her alive, but damaged, a shell of who she'd been? What if the soul had already moved too far beyond reach? That tenuous connection between spirit and flesh, already severed by time and death and the cold mathematics of biology? What if he failed her? The fear was paralyzing, and Connor realized with stunning clarity that he hadn't truly cared about a resurrection's success since maybe ever. The others had been interesting, important, but abstract, patients, subjects, pieces in his game with Ian Martin. But this was Jennifer, his friend, the person who saw what he was, a 400-year-old necromancer who'd manipulated and used people for his own entertainment and chose to stay anyway. This mattered in a way nothing had mattered in centuries. Connor closed his eyes and began the incantation in Old Irish, the words flowing from some deep place in his consciousness where centuries of practice lived. The language of his youth, the language his mother had taught him, the language he'd spoken when he was still human and mortal and believed in simple things like love and loss and redemption. Airig on Mimbas a Anam, Phil ar du chorp, Ta du shaul a thabhart our eyes do eat. Rise from death, soul. Return to your body. Your life is being restored. But this time was different. This time he poured more power into it than any previous resurrection, reaching deeper into that well of death magic that had sustained him through centuries. He could feel it draining from him. Feel the cold darkness that lived in his chest flowing down through his arms, into his hands, into Jennifer's still form. The green light that emanated from his palms was brighter, almost blinding, bright enough that Connor had to squint even with his eyes closed. The cold in the morgue became arctic, dropping 20 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the metal drawers and spread across the floor in crystalline patterns. Connor's breath misted in thick clouds. The fluorescent lights flickered and dimmed, then brightened to painful intensity, then flickered again. Somewhere in the building, an alarm went off, temperature sensors detecting the impossible cold. But Connor couldn't stop, couldn't pause, couldn't let the magic falter. He pushed more power into the spell, more than he'd ever used, more than he'd thought possible. His hands began to shake with the effort. Sweat froze on his forehead. His vision tunneled until all he could see was the green light. All he could feel was the connection between his magic and Jennifer's corpse. All he could hear was his own voice chanting words in a tongue, centuries dead. The ritual took longer than it should, 2 minutes instead of 30 seconds, and Connor could feel it draining him in ways that should be impossible. Necromantic magic didn't tire him. That was the point of immortality, of the bargain he'd made centuries ago. But this felt like it was consuming something deeper than energy, something more fundamental than power. This felt like it was drawing on something he'd long ago thought he'd lost: his humanity, his capacity to care, his willingness to give of himself for someone else. And then, finally, Jennifer's body jerked once, violently. Her eyes snapped open, wide, terrified, unseeing, and she gasped. Water coughed from her lungs, even though the drowning happened an hour ago and should be reversed. She thrashed on the metal slab, trying to escape the car that wasn't there, screaming for air she could already breathe. Jennifer, Jennifer, you're safe. Connor grabbed her shoulders, holding her steady. It's Connor. You're in the morgue. You died, but I brought you back. Listen to my voice. But Jennifer was still in the car, still drowning, still dying. Her hands clawed at her throat. Her legs kicked against nothing. She couldn't see him, couldn't hear him, trapped in the moment of her death. Connor pulled her up into a sitting position, then into his arms, holding her tight while she fought against death that had already passed. You're alive. You're breathing. The water is gone. You're safe. Jennifer, come back. Come back to me. It took 5 minutes of Connor holding her, speaking urgently, before Jennifer's panic subsided enough for recognition. Her thrashing slowed. Her breathing, ragged and desperate, began to even out. She blinked, focused, and really saw him for the first time. Connor? Her voice was hoarse, damaged from screaming and drowning and death. I'm here. You're safe. I've got you. Jennifer looked around, at the morgue, at the metal drawers, at the frost covering every surface, and understanding dawned in her eyes. Ian pushed me. He killed me. I know, Connor said, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept buried. I know. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. Shut up, Jennifer interrupted, still shaking, but with some of her usual steel returning. This is Ian's fault. He's a murderer. You caught me at the wrong end of that fact. Then she started crying, not from fear, but from release. The trauma of drowning, of knowing you're about to die, of the absolute terror of impact and water and darkness. The memory of her car hitting the bridge railing, the sickening lurch as it went over, the crash into the river, the water rushing in, the cold, the inability to escape, the darkness closing in. Connor held her while she cried, this young woman who died because of his games, and made a promise. I'm going to stop him. Today. Now. No more waiting. No more strategy. Ian Martin ends tonight. Jennifer pulled back, wiping her eyes with hands that still shook. Good. But Connor? I'm helping. He killed me. I get a say in how he pays. Connor wanted to argue, to protect her, to send her somewhere safe where murderers couldn't push her off bridges. But he saw the determination in her eyes and recognized it. The same fierce will that made her investigate in the first place, that made her confront him about the resurrections, that made her choose to help despite the impossibility. Okay, Connor agreed. But first, we get you to the farmhouse. The others need to know what happened. As Connor helped Jennifer stand on legs, still uncertain about being alive, wrapped her in blankets against the cold that was as much from death as from the frozen morgue, guided her toward the exit. Through routes that avoided cameras, she asked the question that had been bothering her since she woke. How many times can you do this? Bring people back? Connor was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. As many times as needed. The magic doesn't diminish. But Jennifer, I've never put that much power into a resurrection before. I don't know why. I think it's because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of failing you. Of losing someone who actually matters. Jennifer squeezed his hand. The hand that just brought her back from death. The hand of a 400-year-old necromancer who finally learned to care about something beyond his own survival. You didn't fail. I'm here. Now let's make sure Ian Martin understands what a mistake he made. At the farmhouse, everyone was gathered in the living room at 4 a.m., all awakened by Connor's emergency call. They arrived in various states of confusion and concern. Eleanor in a bathrobe over pajamas. David still in his restaurant clothes. Thomas in workout gear. Margaret and Rebecca together in Margaret's car. When Jennifer walked in, alive despite being dead hours ago, despite Connor's terse message that she'd been murdered, the room erupted in questions and relief. Eleanor hugged Jennifer carefully, as if she might break. Oh, thank God. Connor said Ian killed you. We thought... He did kill me, Jennifer said simply. Connor brought me back. David offered coffee with hands that shook slightly. Even his pragmatism was tested by watching someone die and return within hours. Thomas nodded with understanding. He knew the trauma of violent death, knew what it meant to wake up from murder. Margaret cried quietly, overwhelmed by the escalation. Rebecca whispered prayers of thanksgiving. Harold watched from the corner, barely present but aware enough to recognize another member of their impossible club. Connor came in just an hour after Jennifer and waited for the initial chaos to settle, then called for silence. We need to talk. Ian has gone too far, and I should have stopped this from the beginning. I just got done talking to Chief Rodriguez. She will be here later today to talk to all of you. The room went still. Eleanor's expression sharpened with attention. David set down his coffee. Even Harold seemed to focus slightly, drawn by the gravity in Connor's voice. He told them about the choice he'd made, to use Ian's murders as a game, to bring victims back and orchestrate their revenge, to treat their trauma as interesting rather than horrific. He told them how he'd rationalized it as justice, as giving them a chance at revenge, when really it was about his own entertainment. I've been treating this like a puzzle, Connor said, his voice steady but tired. Like something interesting to occupy my time. And Jennifer died because of it. Because I didn't just stop Ian immediately. Because I wanted to play the game longer. Because I valued psychological revenge over protecting the people who trusted me. The room was silent for a long moment. The weight of Connor's confession hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. He'd laid himself bare, admitted to manipulation and selfishness, and treating their deaths as entertainment. Part of him expected rage, expected them to leave, expected betrayal to match his own. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice sharp with controlled anger. You're right, that was selfish and manipulative and wrong. She paused, her eyes fixed on Connor with an intensity that made him want to look away. But you also brought us back. You gave us second chances. You're trying to make it right now. So what's the plan? Connor blinked, surprised by her directness, by her ability to compartmentalize rage and pragmatism. You're not angry? Oh, I'm furious, Eleanor said, with a calmness that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. You used us. You treated our deaths as entertainment, as some kind of intellectual exercise to relieve your boredom. You brought us back, not because it was right, but because it was interesting. That's inexcusable. That's monstrous, actually. She leaned forward in her chair, her former principal authority radiating from her like heat. But I'm also practical. We can be angry and still work together to stop Ian. We can hold you accountable while recognizing that you're trying to do better now. We are all complicit in this, as well as we helped torture him, and it went all wrong. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. And right now, the priority is stopping a serial killer from burning down a community centre with 80 people inside. David nodded slowly, his restaurateur's mind clearly processing the implications. She's right. Look, Doc, You've been playing God with our lives. You brought us back and then manipulated us into this elaborate revenge scenario without asking if that's what we wanted. That's messed up on about 15 different levels. He took a sip of coffee, then continued. But Ian Martin is still out there killing people. And we're the only ones who can stop him because we're the only ones who've survived him. So let's stop him first, and then we can have a very long, very uncomfortable reckoning about your moral character and what happens next. Thomas cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Agreed. Look, I'm pissed. You manipulated me, used my military background, positioned me like a chess piece. That's not okay. His expression hardened. But I'm also dead and back, which means I've got a unique perspective on priorities. Ian Martin strangled me in my own bed, made it look like suicide. I want to see his face when he realizes I'm still breathing, that his perfect murder failed. After that, we'll talk about what you owe us. Margaret wiped her eyes with a tissue, her hands still trembling slightly. Ian poisoned me, made me think I was dying of natural causes, made me suffer for weeks, thinking my own body was betraying me. Her voice strengthened. You brought me back, Dr. McMasters, and yes, you used me, but you also gave me a chance at justice, at seeing my murderer face consequences. I want that chance, Rebecca added quietly, her faith evident in every word. God brought me back for a purpose. I believe this is it, to witness to justice, to see evil stopped, to stand as proof that murder doesn't have the final word. She looked at Connor with a mixture of disappointment and compassion. Whatever your reasons, Dr. McMasters, whatever your sins, you gave me that chance. You're using God's gift of resurrection for complicated reasons, but the gift itself is still sacred. Let's make sure it counts for something. Even Harold, from his corner, where he'd been mostly absent, spoke in a thin, distant voice. Stop. The killing. No more. Please. Connor looked around the room at these people he'd manipulated and used and somehow, impossibly, earned the conditional trust of. They were angry. They had every right to be angrier, but they were also pragmatic, focused, and united in their desire to see Ian Martin stopped. Thank you, Connor said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words, I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve your trust, conditional or otherwise, but I'm grateful for it. You're right, Eleanor said flatly, not giving him any comfort. You don't deserve it. You've acted abhorrently. You've treated us as means to your ends rather than as people with our own agency. She stood up, her bathrobe somehow making her look more authoritative rather than less. But we're not doing this for you. We're doing it for every person Ian might kill next, for the 80 people who'll die if we don't stop him, for Jennifer, who just came back from drowning because your games got her killed. So what's the plan? Connor took a breath, about to outline his strategy for tomorrow's confrontation, when Jennifer's laptop chimed with an alert. She'd set up monitoring on Ian's email after breaking into his accounts earlier that evening. Now, her face went pale as she read the screen. Connor. We don't have until tomorrow. Jennifer's hands were still shaking, from death, from resurrection, from the cold that seemed to have settled into her bones. But her voice was steady as she read from the laptop screen. Ian's changed his plan. He's moved up the timeline. Connor moved to look over her shoulder, reading the emails she'd pulled up. The others gathered around, creating a small crowd of resurrected victims, reading about their murderer's next move. The emails showed Ian's reasoning in fragmented, increasingly unhinged prose. Saturday? Too risky. They'll be ready. They know somehow. Need to act now. Tonight. Friday evening. Business association, dinner at Riverside Inn. Everyone in one place. Clean slate. Insurance, money. End the ghosts. Prove they're not real by watching them burn again. They can't survive fire twice. Doctor can't save them if there's nothing left. Jesus, David breathed. He's planning to burn down Riverside Inn? During the dinner? Jennifer scrolled through more emails. 60 people on the guest list, plus staff, another 15 or 20. He's going to kill 80 people, Connor said quietly, to cover up 7 murders and collect insurance money. When? Eleanor asked, her voice tight. The dinner is at 7 p.m., Jennifer said. It's currently 5:30 a.m. We have less than 14 hours. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the pre-dawn darkness. So, we cancel the dinner. Call it off. Evacuate. Something. If we cancel, Ian will know someone is onto him, Jennifer pointed out. He might escalate differently, target something else. We can't play whack-a-mole with a mass murderer. Connor thought fast, his ancient mind calculating possibilities and outcomes. We move up the confrontation this morning. We get Ian here before he can execute his plan. Force the confession. Involve Rodriguez immediately. How do we get him here? David asked. Guy's paranoid, unstable. He's not going to come just because you ask nicely. Connor's expression shifted to something calculating and cold. He'll come if he thinks he's hunting. If he believes Connor McMasters is the key to understanding why his victims won't stay dead. Jennifer saw where this was going. You're going to offer yourself as bait. I'm going to invite him here under pretense of a medical consultation. He asked me weeks ago for sleeping pills, anxiety medication. I'll say I can write the prescription if he comes to my home office during my off hours. He's desperate enough and curious enough to accept. And when he arrives, Eleanor asked, he finds all his victims, alive, together, staring at him. Connor's voice was ice. We record his reaction, his confession, and we end this before tonight's dinner becomes a massacre. Jennifer nodded slowly, her mind already moving through the logistics. Call Rodriguez first. Tell her the plan, that you're concerned about Ian's mental health, that you've invited him for an evaluation, that he might need police presence nearby in case Ian becomes unstable. That's actually brilliant, Connor admitted. Rodriguez will position officers discreetly, and when Ian confesses, they're already there. They spent the next hour coordinating. Connor drafted his email to Chief Rodriguez, carefully worded to express medical concern without making accusations. He mentioned Ian's paranoia, his insomnia, his increasingly erratic behaviour at the hardware store. He suggested an informal evaluation at his home office, mentioned that he'd invited Ian that morning, and subtly requested police presence nearby in case the situation requires intervention. Jennifer, despite having died 3 hours ago, set up recording equipment with steady hands, multiple phones positioned around the living room, a hidden camera disguised as a book on the shelf, backup audio recorders in case anything failed. She also started calling business association members, using a carefully constructed lie about facility concerns at Riverside Inn and suggesting the dinner be moved to next week. At 7 a.m., Connor sent his invitation to Ian. Mr. Martin, I have some medications that might help with the stress you've mentioned. Given the sensitive nature, I'd prefer to discuss this privately at my home office rather than the clinic. Are you available this morning at 10 a.m.? No charge, just want to help a community member in distress. Dr. McMasters. Ian's response came within 5 minutes. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you, doctor. The trap was set. Eleanor looked around the room at the assembled group. 7 people who shouldn't be alive. 1 an immortal necromancer who'd learned to care again. So, we have 3 hours to prepare. What's the actual plan once Ian walks through that door? Connor laid it out step by step. They would position themselves throughout the house. Hidden, but ready. When Ian arrived, Connor would lead him to the living room, under pretense of privacy. Then, at Connor's signal, the others would emerge, all of Ian's victims, alive, despite his best efforts to kill them. The psychological impact alone might be enough to break him, to force a confession. And if he runs? Thomas asked. Rodriguez will have officers outside. Ian won't get far. And if he attacks? David pressed. Connor's expression went cold. Then he learns what happens when you threaten someone I've decided to protect. Margaret raised her hand tentatively. I have a question. After this is over, after Ian is arrested, what happens to us? What happens to you? It was the question they'd all been avoiding. Connor had no answer that would satisfy them. So he told the truth. I don't know. We document everything. Give it to Rodriguez. Let the legal system decide. As for me, he paused. I'll probably have to leave Millbrook, start over somewhere else. It's what I've always done when things become complicated. That's the coward's way out, Eleanor said sharply. Yes, Connor agreed. It is, but it's also the safest way for all of you. If I stay, I'm a walking reminder of what you've been through. If I leave, you can start to move forward. Or, Jennifer said quietly, you could stay and help us deal with the aftermath. Help us process the trauma. Help us figure out how to live with what we've experienced. You created this situation, Connor. You should be here to help us through it. Connor looked at her, this young woman who died because of his games, who had every right to hate him, who instead was asking him to stay and face the consequences of his actions. I'll think about it. But first, let's make sure there's an aftermath to deal with. Let's end Ian Martin. The next 2 hours passed intense preparation, each minute marked by the growing awareness that they were about to confront a serial killer in a way no one had attempted before. They positioned the recording equipment with meticulous care. Jennifer, despite having died just hours ago, worked with steady hands and sharp focus, placing phones at strategic angles throughout the living room. One on the bookshelf disguised between volumes of medical texts, another on the mantel propped behind a picture frame, a third tucked into the corner where a potted plant provided natural camouflage. The hidden camera went into a hollowed-out book on the shelf, a copy of Gray's Anatomy that Connor had prepared years ago for exactly this kind of contingency, though he'd never imagined using it quite like this. They planned their entry points, walking through the choreography like actors rehearsing a play. Eleanor would enter from the kitchen, David from the hallway, Thomas from the dining room, where he'd have the best angle to intercept if Ian tried to run. Margaret and Rebecca together from the study, their presence a dual testament to survival. Harold would stay in the bedroom, present but protected, his trauma too recent and too severe to risk further exposure. They rehearsed the confrontation, testing different approaches. Should they enter all at once, creating maximum shock? Or should they appear one by one, building psychological pressure gradually? Eleanor argued for the latter. Her years as a principal had taught her the value of escalating consequences. David agreed, noting that in his restaurant you never presented all the courses at once. You built to the finale. Rebecca prayed, her voice soft but steady, asking for protection and justice and mercy in the right measure. She prayed for Ian's soul as much as for their safety, which made some of the others uncomfortable, but which Connor understood. 400 years had taught him that the line between justice and vengeance was thinner than people wanted to believe, and that someone needed to remember the humanity of even the worst monsters. Thomas stretched like a soldier, preparing for combat, working through old army exercises that helped him focus. Push-ups, sit-ups, shadow boxing that made David step back nervously. "Sorry," Thomas said, not sounding sorry. "It's how I process. If I'm moving, I'm thinking clearly. If I'm still, I'm back in that bed with hands around my throat." David and Eleanor reviewed the plan repeatedly, finding potential flaws and addressing them. What if Ian was armed? What if he attacked immediately? What if he simply denied everything? What if the recording equipment failed? They built contingencies for each scenario, drawing on Eleanor's administrative experience and David's business acumen to create backup plans for their backup plans. Margaret sat with Harold in the bedroom, talking to him quietly, trying to bring him more fully into the present moment. She described what was about to happen, explained that they were going to confront the man who'd killed them all, assured him that he was safe and protected. Harold's responses were minimal. A nod here, a whispered word there. But Margaret persisted with gentle patience, treating him the way she'd treated confused students during her years as a school counsellor. Jennifer worked on her laptop, monitoring Ian's emails and calls, making sure he hadn't changed his mind or altered his plans. She also continued making calls to business association members, successfully convincing most of them to postpone attending the dinner. At 9:45 a.m., Rodriguez called to confirm she had officers positioned nearby. "Connor, I hope you know what you're doing. If Ian is as unstable as you suggested, this could get dangerous." "I know," Connor said, "but I think he needs help, and I'm in the best position to offer it. Thank you for the backup." At 9:55 a.m., Ian Martin's car turned onto the long driveway leading to Connor's farmhouse. Connor stood at the window, watching the car approach, and felt something he hadn't felt in centuries: uncertainty. Not about the magic, not about his ability to survive, but about the human element, about justice and revenge and the line between them, about whether this would end the way he hoped or spiral into something worse. Jennifer moved beside him, her presence solid and alive, despite having been dead just hours ago. "We've got this. All of us together?" Connor nodded. "All of us together." The doorbell rang. Ian Martin had arrived, and the endgame had begun.